Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, August 18th, 2022. A more rapid response to monkeypox, the Biden administration making available to states an additional 1.8 million vaccine doses for general distribution and 50,000 doses specifically for large events that will draw members of the LGBTQ communities where monkeypox is spreading the fastest. CDC director planning an overhaul of her agency following troubles during the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. A landmark $650 million opioid court judgment in Ohio against three large pharmacy chains. We'll talk about that with a Washington Post reporter, where the money will go and what happens to the thousands of similar lawsuits across the country. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin wants energy permitting reform. He wanted that in exchange for his support of the new $740 billion climate, health care, and taxes law that Democrats call the Inflation Reduction Act. But now some House Democrats are balking at permitting reform. We'll get the latest from a reporter at Roll Call. A federal judge in Florida says he will unseal parts of the affidavit that supported the FBI's search of former President Donald Trump's home. Justice Department now needs to recommend which portions will be redacted. That's going to take a week. And celebrating former First Lady Rosalynn Carter on her 95th birthday. And we begin with monkeypox. Federal health officials announcing new steps to curb the spread, including an additional 1.8 million doses of vaccine, and also making the 50,000 vaccine doses available at large events across the country that may attract large numbers from the LGBTQ communities. Also pre-positioning doses of an antiviral treatment for people who test positive. The White House monkeypox response coordinator, Robert Fenton, spoke at today's briefing.
Overall, as of today, HHS has delivered nearly 1 million doses of vaccines to states and cities. We've rapidly scaled up supply of vaccine out in the field, and we are working to meet demand wherever we may find it. In fact, we have the largest generous vaccine program of any country in the globe. And we're not done. As Assistant Secretary O'Connell will discuss, we have accelerated phase 4 of our national vaccine strategy. Starting Monday, an additional 1.8 million doses of vaccine will be available to jurisdictions for ordering. Jurisdictions that are adopting the intradermal administration of vaccine and have used 90% of their current supply of vaccines will be able to order more doses. And as always, we're getting those doses out the door to places as soon as they're ordered. In addition to getting vaccines out quickly to where they're needed, we're focused on helping states and local partners turn these doses into vaccinations. Because more shots in arms is how we get the outbreak under control. To that end, today we're announcing that states and localities will be able to request and receive additional vaccines to support vaccination efforts at large LGBT events in the coming weeks and months. HHS is launching a pilot program that will provide up to 50,000 doses from the national stockpile to be made available for Pride and other events that will have high attendance of gay and bisexual men. These doses will be on top of jurisdictions' existing allocations and supply of vaccine.
The White House monkeypox response coordinator Robert Fenton at today's virtual news conference. NBC News has a story that begins since the outset of the global monkeypox outbreak in May. Public health and infectious disease experts have told the public that the virus is largely transmitted through skin-to-skin contact, in particular during sex between men. Now, however, an expanding cadre of experts has come to believe that sex between men itself, both anal as well as oral intercourse, is likely the main driver of global monkeypox transmission. The skin contact that comes with sex, these experts say, is probably much less of a risk factor. That from NBC News. Also at today's White House monkeypox briefing, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Rochelle Walensky.
So as of August 17th, over 39,000 cases have been detected globally in 94 countries. Here in the United States, there have been over 13,500 cases of monkeypox identified across 49 states, as well as Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Monkeypox case data reported to CDC show that 98% of cases are occurring in men. The median age of cases is 35, and among cases with known recent sexual history and gender, 93% of cases were among men who reported recent sexual contact with other men. Although we anticipate vaccines will provide protection, temporarily reducing or avoiding behaviors that increase your risk of monkeypox exposure is important, especially between your first and second doses of vaccine. From what we know right now, we expect protection to be the highest 2 weeks after the second dose of the vaccine.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, part of today's White House Monkeypox Response News Conference. Dr. Walensky on Wednesday put forth a plan to reform the CDC. CNN writes the new marching orders come after significant stumbles at the agency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. had little capacity to test for infection during the early months of the pandemic, largely because the agency released a flawed test to public health laboratories. The agency also has been criticized throughout the pandemic for issuing public health guidance that some saw as confusing and ineffective, and many also felt it wasn't moving fast enough to respond. That reporting from CNN. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top science advisor at the White House, interviewed today by MSNBC reporter Andrew Mitchell about this potential CDC reform.
I know you're loath to criticize other agencies, but they have been so self-critical. Dr. Walensky, in an extraordinary statement, a scathing report that she herself commissioned, saying that from top to bottom there are really major changes. Is the agency up to those kinds of changes?
I believe so, and I think they should be commended in the fact, particularly Dr. Walensky, realizing and recognizing the shortcomings that have been there for quite a long time, long antedating Dr. Walensky's tenure. And I think it was the stress and the challenge of a historic pandemic that brought some of those deficiencies into sharp relief. So I believe we should commend them for realizing that, particularly Dr. Walensky. There are very, very good people at the CDC. There was an issue with the culture of how they approach their responsibility as a public health agency that I think has now been recognized. So I'm actually optimistic that given the fact that the problems have now been recognized, that there's a pathway to making a very good organization much better.
Dr. Anthony Fauci on MSNBC today. The CDC director, Dr. Walensky, putting out a statement about the reform plan. My goal is a new public health action-oriented culture at CDC that emphasizes accountability, collaboration, communication, and timeliness. Republican Congresswoman Kat Cammack of Florida responding during an interview on Newsmax today.
Well, my first reaction was exactly what you said. It's about damn time. I mean, we can go through the litany of failures that have been the tip of the spear on, but I think this is a long time coming. You know, we have seen thousands of businesses shuttered and people out of business, out of work as a result of the faulty and patchy guidance, misguidance, I guess you could say, of the CDC. Not to mention the lives that have been lost and the ridiculousness of the disruptions from the CDC, not just on COVID, but on so many things, including now monkeypox. It's become a joke, and the credibility of this agency has gone down. So we need a full overhaul. And of course, we know that Republicans, when we take the House back come January, there will be serious investigations, not just into the origins of COVID, but Dr. Fauci, as well as the dealing of this. So it's a long road ahead in this overhaul.
Congresswoman Kat Cammack, Republican from Florida, on Newsmax. Some of the CDC changes that Dr. Rochelle Walensky wants include streamlining the website to simplify guidance to the public and healthcare providers, requiring states and local jurisdictions to share their data, it's now voluntary, and giving CDC more flexibility in funding to shift money as needed to other programs. CDC today also saying it's investigating what it calls a fast-moving E. coli bacteria outbreak. More than 30 people infected in Ohio and Michigan. Some have been hospitalized, and the source unknown so far. An article in the Washington Post begins, a federal judge ordered 3 of the country's largest pharmacy chains to pay $650.6 million to 2 Ohio counties that they were found to have flooded with prescription painkillers. The pharmacies, CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart, and the 2 Ohio counties, Lake and Trumbull near Cleveland. Joining us now is the author on that story, Washington Post national reporter Meryl Kornfield. Thank you so much. What's the basis of this judgment finding the pharmacies at fault?
The legal claim of this case is a common claim that you'll find in thousands of lawsuits filed against the various drug companies as part of this opioid litigation. And it's a claim that these pharmacies committed a public nuisance, meaning that they disturbed the public in these 2 rural Ohio counties by flooding the communities with drugs. And not properly stopping drugs that were diverted, stolen from pharmacies, prescribed incorrectly by doctors that were running pill mills or operating in shady areas, and that these pharmacies should have pushed back against that and done their due diligence.
This judgment is relatively small compared to the other judgments against the drug manufacturers and the opioid distributors. But as you point out, this could be the start of a lot of settlements across the country. How big could it get?
That's a interesting point. It does seem small because it's just in the millions when we're talking about billions for national deals. But we have to keep in mind this is just for 2 Ohio counties and pretty rural ones at that. If we were to extrapolate this, I was talking to an attorney on the plaintiff's side who estimated conservatively that it could be billions of dollars, somewhere upwards of $400 billion was his conservative estimate. So obviously the 3 companies in this case, Walgreens, CVS, and Walmart, wouldn't be able to give that much. So in terms of what this means for the future, I think these companies are going to wonder what trials can they afford to continue with.
Where would the money go, the money in this particular settlement? Would it go to individuals? Would it go to county programs? Has that been determined?
It would go to county programs. As part of reaching this number, the county submitted a plan to the judge for pretty much double what this was, and provided expert evidence about what that money would be used for, and how much those services would cost. And the judge reviewed that analysis and came to the conclusion that $650 million, should cover that.
We're talking with Meryl Kornfield, a reporter with the Washington Post. The 3 companies, in this case, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, plan to appeal. What are their arguments?
They said they will appeal this decision. They've disagreed with this decision of how much money they would pay, and then the decision that this is based off of finding them at fault. And they said that they plan to appeal those decisions, arguing that they can't stop a doctor from misprescribing opioids. It's that doctor's legal responsibility to ensure that they're taking care of their patients.
We mentioned that the opioid manufacturers have been sued, the distributors have been sued, now the pharmacies have been sued. Is there anyone left to sue in the opioid crisis?
There's definitely been years of litigation against these drug companies. I think the reason that these pharmacies really stand out is they are the deepest pockets left standing. A lot of the other companies that you mentioned have settled. Purdue Pharma and Mallinckrodt, 2 major drug makers, are in bankruptcy. The 3 major drug distributors, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, have reached a national settlement, as has J&J, Johnson & Johnson, the drug maker.
And finally, whenever this issue is covered, as I said, it referred to it as the opioid crisis. Is it still an ongoing crisis? What's the state of the situation in the United States with the painkillers?
The So the crisis continues. 500,000 Americans have died in 2 decades from opioids, and those numbers are increasing for all drugs, but the drug supply has changed. What people had started taking during the rise of prescription pills evolved into a later wave of heroin, which has now changed into fentanyl, and meth is also a growing problem. But opioids continues to be a problem, and opioids includes heroin and fentanyl, which are forms of that.
Meryl Kornfield is a Washington Post national reporter. Find her story at WashingtonPost.com, and on Twitter, she's at Meryl Kornfield. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
On Wall Street today, the Dow up 18, NASDAQ up 27, S&P up 9. Labor Department says that applications for unemployment insurance in the U.S. fell a bit last week by 2,000 to 250,000. Associated Press also writing last week's number, which raised some eyebrows, was revised down by 10,000. And also the number of Americans collecting traditional unemployment benefits increased by 7,000 the week that ended August 6 to 1.43 million. That's the most since early April. Congress continuing its August recess. One bill that's expected to come up when they come back in September is energy permitting reform. It's sponsored by Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia. He says he was promised a vote on that bill in exchange for his support for the $740 billion climate, energy, healthcare, and taxes bill that was just signed into law by President Biden, the one that they call the Inflation Reduction Act. But Roll Call is reporting that energy permitting may have trouble getting through the U.S. House. We'll talk about that with a Roll Call reporter in just a minute. First, here is Senator Manchin, who talked about this with reporters outside the White House on Tuesday, right after that budget reconciliation big bill was signed into law.
Did you talk at all today about how that's going to happen?
We've written the permit. The bill's written. The bill has been written.
Given you a timeline? Have they given you a
I'm hoping. Well, CR is the most noticeable one to do. That'd be about September 30th.
That's 100% guarantee from the president.
Well, I'm just saying we're all going to fight for it, and it's a guarantee that we're all in the same boat. We know exactly why. If you want, I want to make sure there's a balance between the fossil energy that we need and the clean energy we should be investing in. People might put more emphasis on one or the other. Whatever they do, you're going to have permitting reform to get it done. Because you can't build a transmission line out in the middle of the desert if you want to build a major wind farm or a major solar farm to get it back into the populous area of the country, unless there's an awful lot of permitting and cooperation that goes on. So, yeah, they understand.
Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, with reporters outside the White House on Tuesday. A headline at Roll Call, prospects dim in-house for Manchin's federal permitting measure. Roll Call reporter Ben Hullac on the phone with us now. Thank you so much for joining us. So what's going on here?
Well, this is the second step of the broad agreement that Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Manchin reached. The idea that, and this is coming from Manchin largely, is to overhaul federal permitting in America. And a lot of critics of the federal permitting process say it takes too long, it's dragged out, and Manchin wants to speed up that process. We don't know the details of this agreement. We know there's sort of a blueprint that Manchin has released, but we don't have the text of any bill yet. So we're still scrutinizing what may come. But the general idea is that this is part of the broader agreement that Manchin and Schumer agreed to as part of the budget reconciliation bill that's now a law.
That word dim, though, what are the problems it may face even if it passes the Senate as it reaches the House?
Right. And it's not clear which chamber would go first. The idea is that potentially this could be attached to a spending bill, a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. This is a tough slog likely in the House from liberal Democrats based on what they've seen so far. So again, there's sort of a blueprint out there that Manchin's office has released, and it includes things like changing NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which is sort of this broad law that allows communities to weigh in on infrastructure projects. And it would also approve a pipeline that would run from West Virginia to Virginia, and then change the Clean Water Act. So we're still waiting for details from Manchin, but a lot of these things are just red lines for liberals in the House and likely the Senate too. So that's where we get the dim prospect.
It brings up the question, what exactly was the agreement between Senator Manchin and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer? Because the other part of the agreement, the reconciliation bill, is now law. So was it just that there would be a vote or a push to get this permitting bill to get through?
That's my understanding. My understanding is that there was a deal that this would be called up for a vote of some kind, and then it would be voted on by the end of the fiscal year, the current fiscal year, so the end of September. Manchin, it is a 50-50 Senate, of course, but Manchin doesn't have as much leverage here now that the big bill has become law. Biden signed it this week. So I obviously was not in those conversations, but this needs more reporting, more interest. And there are a lot of folks on the left in the House making noises that they're going to vote against this potentially, or they're very skeptical of it. Pramila Jayapal from Washington leads the Progressive Caucus, and she said she really wasn't briefed or aware of the deal before it became public. So there are a lot of votes to win if this were to pass the House, and there's a pretty slim margin of error.
We're talking with Roll Call reporter Ben Hullac. Is this permitting bill something that Republicans might support?
Potentially. I chatted with Henry Cuellar from Texas. He's a conservative Democrat from South Texas on the floor last Friday, and he said the only way this gets through is if it's bipartisan. There is plenty of buy-in from Republicans in both chambers to do something about permitting, but would they want to deliver a win to Joe Manchin, who just shepherded through and was a key figure in the new climate healthcare tax law that Democrats are cheering now? Would they be out for maybe not revenge, but would they want to deliver another victory, or would they come to the table and agree to something? I don't know. And of course, there would be difficulty for Democrats to wrangle the left wing of their party too. It's fair to say there's support from both parties, but you could lose about 4 votes if you're the Democrats in the House to get this through. And of course, it would need to get over the filibuster in the Senate. So lots of hurdles.
And we'll look forward as Congress returns in September. Ben Hullac covering climate and energy for Roll Call. Find the story at rollcall.com, and on Twitter, he's at Ben Hullac. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, a discussion of relations between China and Saudi Arabia and what that means for U.S. relations with those countries. A panel at the Hudson Institute. And Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, progressive activists at the Netroots Nation Convention in Pittsburgh talk about elections and countering disinformation. Get C-SPAN Radio schedule updates at cspan.org and on Twitter at C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. An Associated Press story from West Palm Beach, Florida. A federal judge on Thursday ordered the Justice Department to put forward proposed redactions as he committed to making public at least part of the affidavit supporting the search warrant for former President Donald Trump's estate in Florida. The U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart gave prosecutors a week to submit a copy of the affidavit with proposed redactions for the information it wants to keep secret after the FBI seized classified and top-secret information during a search at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last week. The hearing was convened Thursday after several news organizations sought to unseal additional records tied to last week's search, including the affidavit. It is likely to contain key details about the Justice Department's investigation examining whether Trump retained and mishandled classified and sensitive government records. That reporting from Associated Press. This morning, before the hearing and the judge's order, C-SPAN spoke with a former U.S. Attorney, Brett Tolman, about the process of unsealing a search warrant affidavit.
Traditionally, the issue with unsealing is both one that protects the defendant as well as the investigation of the prosecution. You know, typically a defendant is just as motivated to keep quiet all the facts that are being alleged against him or her. And so you don't have this very often where the affidavit is being requested to be released. If you do, it's typically by a defense attorney that wants to see whether or not there was sufficient probable cause outlined in the affidavit to justify the search to begin with. And then if not, or if they think that there's a problem with it, then they could file a motion to quash the search warrant. Here, the Department of Justice has indicated they think that it will reveal too many details about the scope of their investigation, and it may reveal those that are cooperating in the investigation or additional targets. And so they have argued that they do not want it to be released by the court.
Yeah, in the past, if you've seen this in your experience, what sort of impact does this sort of thing have when an affidavit is unsealed like that? Does it generally mean the investigation has to draw to a close? Does it mean that element of the investigation may not continue?
No, I think it's the department's position on this is not inconsistent with what it does in most cases, and that is resists the revealing of the search warrant because they may have identified sources, but they also don't like to have that level of transparency that early on in their investigation because they believe that it will hamper what they're able to do. The reality is most of the times an indictment is very quickly filed prior to this revealing of a search warrant. So you're dealing with somebody who's been charged with federal crimes. Here, you have the unusual, situation where it is the defendant that is saying, or the target of an alleged investigation that's saying, "Hey, reveal all of it. I want to see all of it."
What was your reaction to the DOJ releasing the elements that were found in that search warrant?
Well, I think it reveals that the search warrant itself is very broad. That's not surprising. Investigators try to get as broad a search warrant as they possibly can, so that when they search a residence, they're pretty much free to look anywhere that a document may be. So my initial reaction is it's not surprising that it's very broad. The list that they put together of what they have secured, there's questions. I think it leaves more questions than answers. What was the true scope of the investigation at the time of the search warrant, and why were there things that were taken that seem to be inconsistent with the theory of the investigation?
Brett Tolman, former U.S. Attorney 2006 through 9, now Executive Director of the group Right on Crime, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. A spokesperson for former President Trump putting out a statement reacting to the judge's order today that at least part of that affidavit be unsealed once redactions are made. Statement saying that President Trump has made clear his view that the American people should be permitted to see the unredacted affidavit related to the raid and break-in of his home Mar-a-Lago. The statement goes on today. Magistrate Judge Reinhart rejected the DOJ's cynical attempt to hide the whole affidavit from Americans. No redaction should be necessary, and the whole affidavit should be released, given the Democrats' penchant for using redactions to hide government corruption, just like they did with the Russia hoax. That statement from a spokesperson from former President Trump. Another Associated Press story, a top executive at former President Donald Trump's family business pleaded guilty Thursday to evading taxes in a deal that could potentially make him a star witness against the company at a fall trial. Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg pleaded guilty to all 15 of the charges he faced in the case. He was accused of dodging taxes on lavish fringe benefits he got from the company. His attorney putting out a statement, rather than risk the possibility of 15 years in prison, he has agreed to serve 100 days. We are glad to have this behind him. And the Manhattan District Attorney says he expects Weisselberg to provide invaluable testimony against the Trump family business. Some different takes today from two Republicans about how former President Trump will influence the November midterm elections. Former Virginia Congresswoman Barbara Comstock and commentator Bill Kristol, now with the publication The Bulwark, were on a panel hosted by American University. Barbara Comstock says Donald Trump will cause Republicans to lose winnable seats.
The Senate now is looking more likely to stay in Democrat hands. Different story in the House, although I do expect, like most, that you're still going to see the House gain seats and get into Republican hands. It's not going to be the huge sweep that they were talking earlier. They thought it was going to be more like 2010, 40, 50, even 60 seats. People were talking about this huge red blowout. I do not think it's going to be that. And the number one reason is, instead of having your number one issues being the economy, Biden's poor ratings, inflation, gas prices, education concerns, crime, Trump is back in the front seat driving the clown car for so many Republicans. And that, if you are in a swing seat, that is a nightmare. Having been in a swing seat when Trump was driving the White House clown car, and it didn't matter what your numbers were, Trump's numbers were, after the 2018 election, you could go and look at whatever Trump's negative numbers were. That's what the Democrat got, almost to a T.
Yeah.
Negatives were not what Trump's were in my district.
Right.
But that's what was the gift that keeps on giving. So as numbers, or actually the policies, are doing better, you're seeing Democrat candidates outrun Biden numbers in the swing districts. I think it's largely because of this reappearance of Trump. The fact that while Trump's problems are increasing, I know he's, and we'll probably talk about Liz Cheney, while he's been so happy on his vengeance tour going after Liz and others, he's ignored the fact that he has increasing legal problems. And as we've seen from 60 cases that he took after the 2020 election, Trump does very poorly in court where truth and facts matter. So he's now entering the factual legal portion of his problems. And today he had guilty pleas from his CFO or lawyer up in personal business, and you're going to see, I expect to see, indictments of White House and lawyers and people coming soon, and perhaps even Trump himself.
Barbara Comstock was Congresswoman, Republican from Virginia, talking about a midterm elections panel held today by American University's Sine Institute of Politics and Policy. She served in Congress 2015 through 19. She lost the 2018 race to Democrat Jennifer Wexton. Also at today's American University event, Bill Kristol, editor-at-large at The Bulwark, he says the 2020 elections, during which House Republicans gained seats, even as Donald Trump at the top of the ticket lost re-election, shows that being allied with Donald Trump can help in some areas of the country.
Ultimately, I do think Republicans will get punished this year for various things, and Democrats will outperform the traditional mid-year election. But I just want to say, as a practical matter, getting back to the path dependency and contingency of history, if the Republicans had lost 10 seats, which is totally within what people expected, incidentally. Everyone ridiculed Trump for saying we're going to win the House, gain House seats, and whatever. He didn't quite win it, but they came pretty close. If Republicans lose 10 House seats in 2020 and lose a couple of these Senate seats they thought were in play that ended up reverting at the end, I think the effect of January 6th is totally different. I don't think Kevin McCarthy, I don't think they rallied it. They did not think, Republicans in the House do not think Donald Trump is a disaster for them. Kevin McCarthy is 3-1 odds to become Speaker of the House in 2022. Barbara can say correctly, what about 2018? And what about this? And what about that? And it's going to be a horrible caucus. But at the end of the day, it's not Florida and Texas, or the Texas and Florida, the second and third largest states in the nation. And they're probably going to reelect Republican governors who have become more and more Trumpy and much Trumpier than their predecessors. So they have not, one of the biggest things students, I think people really need to think hard about is, I hope there's a political price to be paid. There's some political price has been paid, but until there's a much more evident political price to be paid for being a Trumpy Republican, and it's not just in rather few swing districts, but it's across the nation, it's, I think, very hard to change the party. Now, I think maybe Pennsylvania and Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan this year will make a big difference, honestly, and that will be an interesting question then. Does it affect the presidential raises in 23, 4, does it really strengthen those on the Republican side who say we can't do Trump again? I think it could. You know what? If Gretchen Whitmer wins by 7 in Michigan, and if they win, if Shapiro wins by 8 in Pennsylvania, and suddenly Republican donors are looking at it and thinking, geez, we cannot just go down this path because we've just seen a preview of 24 if Trump is the nominee, that could really change things.
Bill Kristol, editor-at-large for The Bulwark, on a panel at American University. You can find the full discussion on the 2022 midterm elections at our website, cspan.org. 81 days until Election Day. This is Washington Today. Story from Reuters. Russia said on Thursday it could shut down Europe's largest nuclear power plant after it came under shelling at the front lines in Ukraine, a move Kyiv said would increase the risk of a nuclear catastrophe there. The power station sits on the Russian-controlled south bank of a huge reservoir. Ukrainian forces hold the north bank. Recent days have seen several incidents of shelling at the plant, which both sides blame on the other. Ukraine also accuses Russia of using the plant as a shield for its forces to launch strikes across the reservoir on Ukrainian-held cities, which Russia denies. This issue also getting the attention today at the U.S. State Department with spokesperson Ned Price.
The United States remains deeply concerned about Russia's military takeover and continued control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency must be given access to ZNPP as soon as possible and in a manner that respects Ukraine's full sovereignty to help ensure the safety and security of the plant and monitoring of its nuclear material. Brutality has been a hallmark of Russia's war against Ukraine, and the United States is aware of reports that Russian personnel have abused and coerced members of the ZNPP staff. We applaud the Ukrainian authorities and operators for their commitment to nuclear safety and security under the most trying of circumstances. The United States condemns, in the strongest terms, Russia's reckless disregard for nuclear safety and security. Along with our allies and partners, we call on Russia to cease all military operations at or near Ukraine's nuclear facilities and to return full control of the ZNPP to Ukraine. We continue to support the efforts of the International Atomic Energy Agency to fulfill its safeguards mandate and to assist Ukraine with nuclear safety and security measures across its nuclear facilities.
State Department spokesman Ned Price at the opening of his daily briefing. A story from Al Jazeera. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he has agreed to the parameters of a potential mission of the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, to that nuclear plant after repeated shelling of the complex raised fears of a nuclear catastrophe. Speaking at a news conference in Lviv on Thursday following a trilateral meeting with the Turkish president and the UN Secretary General, Zelensky said only absolute transparency and control of the situation by the UN's IAEA, among other bodies, could guarantee nuclear safety. Today is the birthday, 95th birthday, of former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter. She was in the White House when her husband, Jimmy Carter, was president 1976 through 1980. He, by the way, is 97 years old, turning 98 in a few months. The Carter Center in Atlanta encouraging the use of the Twitter hashtags Mrs. Carter Making History and 95th Birthday for people to post their happy birthdays and congratulations. Among the issues that Rosalynn Carter was known for championing, mental health. C-SPAN spoke to her in 2013 about how she first became interested in that issue. It was when Jimmy Carter was running for governor of Georgia.
I enjoyed it. I mean, I learned so much about our state. We have 159 counties. I knew the capital of every county. And issues. In fact, that's how I got involved in mental health issues, campaigning for Jimmy. They had our big mental health facility, hospital. There'd been a big expose, and the Mental Health Systems Act had been passed in 63, and this was 1966 when Jimmy first ran for governor. Got beat that time, but we got in late because our leading Democratic candidate had a heart attack. But they were moving people out of the hospital because it was like 12,000 people where they had room for 3,000. It was awful. It was happening all over the country. And they were moving them out before they had any facilities for them. They had no services in the communities. And everybody started talking to me about, what will your husband do if he's elected governor of Georgia? I just learned so much about what was going on And after we lost that election, I worked 4 years to learn a little bit about mental health. And then the first month in office, he appointed the Governor's Commission to improve services to the mentally and emotionally handicapped. I got upset with the press too because they covered my mental health work the first few meetings I had. And then they never showed up anymore. And one of the things I wanted to do is bring attention to the issue and how terrible it was and what few services there were. And thinking just getting it out in the public. That's what I did in Georgia, developed a good program in Georgia, by the way. But they just didn't come. And so one day I was walking in the downstairs floor in the White House and met this woman who was one of the press people. And I said, you don't ever nobody ever covers my meetings she said, Ms. Carter, mental health is just not a sexy issue. and that I didn't like, but I never did get very much coverage for it. But we toured the country, found out what was needed, developed legislation, and passed the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980. It passed through Congress 1 month before Jimmy, as he says, was involuntarily retired from the White House, and the incoming president put it on his shelf, never implemented it. It was one of the greatest disappointments of my life.
Former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, a C-SPAN interview in 2013. Today is her 95th birthday. You can listen to more of this interview on C-SPAN's podcast, First Ladies in Their Own Words. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Among those sending their congratulations to Rosalynn Carter, former First Lady Michelle Obama, who tweets, "Happy birthday to the thoughtful, caring, and trailblazing Rosalynn Carter. Your shining example of service and humility has meant so much not only to me, but to countless people around the world." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories that Washington is talking about sent to you every day. You can go to c-span.org/connect to subscribe. Have a good night.